It wasn't the fastest, it wasn't the prettiest, but when the US Navy needed a fighter to claw back the Pacific, they didn't send a hero, they sent a thug. Welcome to Historical Digs, where today we uncover the story behind the F6F Hellcat, a promising plane with a lethal design flaw deep in its core. The Zero Killer Secret. In the summer of 1942, a U.S. Navy salvage team hacked through the frozen marshes of Akutan Island, Alaska, their boots sinking into tundra stained with oil and ambition. Their prize, the crumpled carcass of a Mitsubishi A6M0, its fuselage cracked like an eggshell after a botched strafing run. This wasn't just wreckage, it was a cipher, a chance to dissect the plane that had terrorized the Pacific since Pearl Harbor, outmaneuvering every Allied fighter with serpentine grace. The Zero arrived at Grumman's Long Island hangars in pieces, its once pristine Hinomaru insignia smeared with mud and irony. Engineers swarmed the wreck, their calipers and notepads poised to decode its secrets. What they found shocked them. The Zero's legendary agility came at a Faustian cost. No armor plating, fuel tanks that bled gasoline at the slightest puncture, and wings held together by faith and rivets. A pilot seat mounted dangerously close to the main fuel line, a design quirk engineers later described as functionally suicidal in high-speed dives. Grumman's team, led by the gruff but brilliant Jake Swerbel, saw an opportunity. If the Zero was a samurai's katana, razor-sharp but brittle, the Hellcat would be a sledgehammer. Every design choice screamed pragmatism over panache. They armored the cockpit with 212 pounds of steel, thick enough to stop 20mm cannon shells. They slapped on a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, a 2,000 horsepower beast that could outclimb the Zero even when lugging an extra half-ton of weight. And they engineered self-sealing fuel tanks using layers of rubber and latex that closed bullet holes mid-flight, a technology the Japanese dismissed as unnecessary complexity. But the Hellcat's genius lay in its simplicity. Unlike the Corsair's troublesome gull wing, the Hellcat's wings folded with rugged hydraulics, making it carrier-ready from day one. The hydraulics were stripped to essentials, ensuring even rookie pilots could wrestle the controls without fear of stalling. Test pilots marveled at its resilience. During trials, Hellcats routinely returned riddled with bullet holes. One documented case showed over 150 impacts, yet still landed intact. The psychological calculus was deliberate. Japanese pilots, trained in acrobatic dogfighting, relied on tight turns and ritualistic duels. The Hellcat refused to play along. U.S. tactics boiled down to a brutal mantra. Dive from altitude, spray 50 caliber rounds in a 10-degree cone, then climb away. Repeat. No elegance, no honor, just physics. By late 1943, the shift was undeniable. At Bougainville, one engagement saw Hellcat score 28 kills with 0 losses, a figure supported by post-battle Navy reports. Yet the Hellcat's most lethal feature wasn't its guns or armor, it was its indifference. While Zeros demanded virtuoso pilots, the Hellcat turned farm boys and college dropouts into killers. Its forgiving controls and rugged airframe forgave mistakes, turning desperation into dominance. By the time Tokyo realized their invincible Zero had been out-engineered, Grumman was already churning out Hellcats faster than Japan could print propaganda. The Pacific's balance of power hadn't just shifted, it had been hammered into a new shape, one wing panel at a time. Before we dig deeper into the Hellcat's brutal rise, hit that like button and subscribe to Historical Digs. Your support helps us unearth the lost stories of history's most battle-hardened war machines. Production line warfare. The Grumman Aircraft Factory in Bethpage, New York wasn't just a workplace, it was a battlefield. A cacophony of rivet guns, hissing hydraulics, and shouted orders echoed through its cavernous halls, where the war against time and scarcity was waged with relentless urgency. Dubbed the Ironworks for its no-nonsense efficiency, this sprawling complex became the forge where America's aerial sledgehammer took shape. But building a war-winning fighter required more than steel and sweat. It demanded a revolution in mass production, one that turned housewives into welders and assembly lines into assembly armies. The Hellcat's design was a study in ruthless simplification. Grumman's engineers, led by the pragmatic Leroy Grumman himself, sliced through complexity like a torch through aluminum. Take the landing gear. Earlier fighters used complex assemblies with dozens of moving parts, each one a potential failure point. The Hellcat's gear was simplified and ruggedized, designed with fewer components and built to endure brutal carrier landings without complaint. Engineers mocked up prototypes using scrap metal and railroad ties, testing them under loads that bent steel rods like licorice. The result? A system so rugged that pilots joked they could land on a picket fence and still taxi to the mess hall. But the real heroes of Bethpage were the Rosies, thousands of women recruited from Long Island suburbs and tenements. These women weren't just workers, they were alchemists, turning sweat and steel into air superiority. Clad in government-issued shop uniforms and red kerchiefs, meant to shield hair from machinery, not make fashion statements, they became the backbone of Bethpage's ironworks. Their grit was immortalized in one of the era's most iconic symbols, Rosie the Riveter. Norman Rockwell's Saturday Evening Post cover gave Rosie a face, but it was the real women on factory floors who gave her a soul. By 1943, the nickname Rosies wasn't just a slogan, it was a badge of honor. These women worked 12-hour shifts, their hands blistered and ears ringing, yet their output was staggering. A completed Hellcat rolled off the line every 90 minutes. Speed came at a cost. The factory floor at Bethpage ran like a wartime pressure cooker. With quotas soaring, engineers streamlined processes and often trusted skilled welders and assemblers to self-certify non-critical work. Production bulletins replaced traditional blueprints, sometimes updated multiple times in a single day. Perfection gave way to pragmatism. Inspectors prioritized output, approving airframes that met the minimum standards needed to fly. And with the pace came quirks. A few Hellcats reportedly left the line with mismatched paint, misaligned insignias, or forgotten tools still lodged in their wheel wells. The Navy's strategy was coldly mathematical. While Japan's Mitsubishi plant in Nagoya painstakingly hand-fitted each Zero, Grumman treated Hellcats as disposable. By 1944, America produced 500 Hellcats a month, more than Japan built Zeros in a year. Each cost $35,000, roughly $500,000 today, significantly cheaper than the Corsair's complex airframe. And as the Pacific War accelerated, some new pilots reached the front lines with barely 30 hours in the Hellcat, rushed through training and patched up planes that instructors half-joked were held together by baling wire. Yet the plane's true brilliance lay in its repairability. Unlike the Zero, which demanded artisan care, the Hellcat was designed for rough hands and crude tools. According to crew accounts, engine swaps were performed under fire, sometimes using only chain hoists and sledgehammers. Deck crews famously repaired battle damage with improvised fixes. One Hellcat reportedly flew again after mechanics sealed oil leaks using makeshift materials. By mid-1944, the ironworks wasn't just building planes, it was manufacturing inevitability. Every rivet, every weld, every grease-stained blueprint screamed one truth. Japan couldn't outlast a nation that turned sewing machines into machine guns and teachers into titans. Turkey shoot to Tokyo. June 19, 1944 dawned over the Philippine Sea with a metallic hum. Aboard the USS Lexington, pilots of Fighting Squadron 16 gulped black coffee and scanned the horizon. Below deck, armorers loaded belts of .50 caliber rounds into Hellcats, their wings already streaked with oil and salt. The Japanese had thrown everything into this fight, carriers, bombers, veteran pilots, but the Americans held a trump card. 450 F6F Hellcats, poised to rewrite the rules of aerial combat. What followed wasn't a battle, it was an execution. The Japanese strike force, codenamed Eigo, was a desperate gambit. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's fleet launched 373 aircraft, a mix of Zeros, dive bombers, and torpedo planes, to smash the U.S. Fifth Fleet. But Ozawa's pilots faced a nightmare. Hellcats orbiting in layered combat air patrols at 10,000 feet were vectored toward incoming raids by shipboard radar and radio commands from fighter direction centers. As radar plots lit up with enemy formations, carrier radios crackled with intercept orders, directing Hellcat squadrons toward bombers spotted at 12,000 feet and closing fast. What happened next was less dogfight than slaughter. Hellcats dove like raptors, their double Wasp engines screaming. The Zero's legendary agility meant nothing against a foe that attacked vertically, using gravity as a weapon. Lieutenant Alex Vrachu, a 24-year-old ace from Illinois, later described the chaos. They were stacked like ducks in a carnival game. You'd pick one, hose it with tracers, then climb before they even knew you were there. Vrachu's morning sortie lasted 8 minutes. 6 kills. His after-action report, scribbled mid-flight, read, "Got 6, out of ammo, returning." The Hellcat's lethality wasn't just technical, it was psychological. Japanese bomber crews, trained to fly tight formations, broke ranks under the onslaught. Zero pilots conditioned to honor-bound duels found themselves swarmed by Hellcats attacking in pairs. By dusk, Ozawa's first wave had lost 240 aircraft. U.S. losses? 6 Hellcats. Sailors, watching flaming wrecks rain into the sea, dubbed it the Marianas Turkey Shoot. But the Hellcat's ultimate test came not from zeros, but from Japan's new terror weapon, the kamikaze. One popular, but likely apocryphal tale, claims that during the kamikaze waves off Leyte, a Hellcat pilot rammed a Yokosuka D4Y head-on to protect his carrier. According to the story, he limped back to the Essex with a Judy's propeller lodged in his wing. The after-action report supposedly read, "Aircraft repurposed for spare parts." Whether myth or truth, it captures the kind of desperation Hellcat pilots sometimes faced. The Hellcat's airframe, overbuilt and understressed, proved uniquely suited to kamikaze warfare. While Corsairs buckled under mid-air collisions, Hellcats absorbed impacts that would have sheared other planes apart. Grumman's chief engineer, Bill Schwendler, insisted on extreme durability in the Hellcat's design. Though combat specs didn't require it, internal targets reportedly pushed structural tolerances far beyond the norm. Some engineers later joked it had a 5-to-1 safety margin. That over-engineering, especially in the wings and fuselage, proved critical when kamikaze attacks began. What might have torn a lesser aircraft apart became survivable in a Hellcat. By battle's end, Hellcats had claimed 75% of all U.S. Navy aerial kills in World War II. Their dominance wasn't just in numbers, but in cold, systemic efficiency. As historian Mark Stilley notes, the Hellcat didn't win battles, it erased them. The afterlife of a workhorse. When the guns fell silent in 1945, the Hellcat faced a new enemy: peacetime. By 1946, the U.S. Navy had 12,275 Hellcats and 0 reasons to keep them. With the atomic age dawning, propeller planes seemed as obsolete as bayonets. The purge was swift and merciless. At NAS Litchfield Park, Arizona, rows of Hellcats baked under the desert sun, their wings stripped for scrap aluminum, their engines yanked out and sold for $47.50 apiece. By 1950, 90% of all Hellcats had been melted into soda cans, lawn chairs, or Chevrolets. For machines that had once dominated the skies, it was an unceremonious end. But some met darker fates. At China Lake, California, engineers bolted remote controls into derelict Hellcats, transforming them into target drones for missile tests. Pilots who'd once flown them watched as their old mounts were shot from the sky, their carcasses pockmarked by sidewinders. Yet the Hellcat's DNA refused to die. Grumman's overbuilt airframe and emphasis on pilot survivability became gospel for Cold War designers. The A-10 Warthog, built to loiter over battlefields and soak up punishment, echoed the Hellcat's ugly durability. Modern mass production principles in aviation trace partial roots to Grumman's wartime innovations. Today, fewer than 30 Hellcats survive. One, painstakingly restored at the National Naval Aviation Museum, is said to bear a jagged patch from a 1944 kamikaze strike, rumored to include aluminum salvaged from a downed Zero. Curators jokingly call it more Frankenstein than fighter. And when its engine roars to life at air shows, growling like a dump truck in a tornado, onlookers don't see a relic. They see the sledgehammer that bent history, then vanished into its shadow. A reminder that sometimes victory belongs not to the glamorous, but to the unstoppable. But what do you think? Was the Hellcat a masterpiece or just a solid meat and potatoes machine? Maybe both? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to join us on the next historical dig. Until then, remember, history is full of hidden gems if you know where to dig.